In this Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, we're going to be talking a little bit about character progression, stats, perks, character builds, how it all comes together to make Henry into the sort of character that you want. This is going to be kind of a lengthy video because we're going to be going into the ins and outs of some of the stats as well as a lot of the perks. So if you've been kind of wanting to figure out like how to put together a character that you want to play in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, you should probably watch on for some helpful information. So in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, you have a main level which progresses predominantly as you progress the game. You have stats, strength, agility, vitality, and speech that progress as you do activities related to these. And you have skills and combat skills that will increase the more you use them. For instance, if you use a bow or crossbow a lot, your marksmanship will increase faster, or if you use a sword a lot, your sword's combat skill will increase faster. And what this means is that the way that you play Henry is going to have strengths and weaknesses. For instance, if you find yourself getting into fights constantly and you really like getting into combat in this game, then probably your strength stat is going to improve faster than maybe your vitality or your speech. And also, whatever weapon type you're using predominantly in combat, that will progress very, very quickly, whereas maybe the other weapon types in the game don't progress as quickly because you're not using them. So you'll quickly find yourself identifying what sort of character build you'll have by what activities you do in the game. Now, what's really interesting about Kingdom Come Deliverance 2's character progression for Henry is that your main level, your stats, strength, agility, vitality, and speech, your skills, and your combat skills all have perks associated with them. And as you level these higher and higher in the game, these skills, these combat skills, these stats, etc., not only will you gain passive benefits from doing so, for instance, like you can lockpick more easily if you increase Thievery, you will also gain access to perks that can make thieving more easy for you in general. So in this video, we're going to go through what some of those are and ones that I highly recommend getting. So first, we'll take a look at main level. This is your main character level. This increases as you progress the game by improving strength, agility, vitality, and speech, and just, doing general quests inside the game. The max level for any skill in this game, or any stat, is 30, by the way, so you can't get higher than that. You can see in the bottom left what your current level is. You can see that at the top as well, but you can also see your progress to your next level. And something I want to note really early on in this video is that you will have enough perk points to get every perk that you want in this game by the end of the game. You will have plenty of perk points to do that. However, there is one exception, which is there are some perks that are, black and white. For instance, like if you get one, then you can't get the other one. And if you get the other one, then you can't get this one. So there are some scenarios where you'll lock yourself out of a perk because you select a different one, but you will have enough perk points to buy all the perks that you want if you level every stat to 30. You just might not be able to acquire them all because some will make it so that they're exclusive to one another. So strength in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 allows you to increase the control and damage you deal in melee attacks. It also allows you to perform better with unarmed attacks. It increases your carrying capacity, which is really important because you're going to be hauling a lot of stuff around in this game, and generally speaking, how much you carry is very much limited by your carrying capacity because you're almost always full of stuff. It also makes it easier to do full draws on like bows that have high strength requirements and easier to move and fight in heavy armor. You predominantly gain experience from this by fighting, so you'll generally gain strength from either doing unarmed combat in tournaments or like little brawl arenas, or just from fighting enemies out in the landscape. So if you're somebody who enjoys fighting every time you can possibly fight, you're going to probably have pretty high strength, which is great predominantly for the carrying capacity and the melee damage. I highly recommend for strength that you pick up Train Hard, Fight Easy, and Train Hard, Fight Easy 2 as soon as you can get them. This is going to reduce the strength required for any weapon that has a strength requirement. This will allow you to use better weapons early on. Oftentimes early on in the game, better weapons are gated behind higher attribute requirements, so even if you find them, you won't be able to use them. This will make it so that's not the case. So you definitely want to take these two as quickly as you can. So next is agility. Agility predominantly affects your melee weapon attacks, making them cost less stamina, which is important because stamina often regulates how many attacks you can do and how aggressive you can be in combat. It also increases the speed at which you attack with melee attacks, as well as how quickly you draw a bow. So if you like using bows and you want to shoot faster, this is great. It also makes you move quicker, suffer less damage from falls, which can be deadly in this game if you're not careful, so that's good. Makes you better at stealth if you like to play stealthily, and it also makes it so that you handle heavy armor more effectively, and that your dodges in combat will generally be more effective and easier to use. You predominantly gain levels in agility by using weapons in combat that have higher agility ratings. So if you want to level your agility faster versus strength, you could switch to a different weapon in combat, like maybe a different sword. And also from sneaking around enemies stealthily that aren't detecting you, kind of like Skyrim. Like you can just get near them, and if they don't see or detect you, the more you sneak around them, the more experience you'll gain here as well. And just like with strength, you have Deft Hands and Deft Hands 2 here for perks. I highly recommend taking both of these as quickly as you can because, again, just like strength, they reduce the agility requirements for weapons. So you might find weapons you want to use, but you don't meet the requirements and they're better than what you have. This will allow you to lower those requirements until you can use them very easily. Next, we move on to Vitality. This stat predominantly affects stamina that you have and the rate that it recovers inside and outside of combat. This is really important because you use stamina to attack in combat, you use it to sprint, and the less stamina you have, the less you're going to be able to fight aggressively or be able to counterattack stuff and things like that. So higher stamina is good. It also lets you run longer distances, and a lot of times you're running long distances in this game, so making that easier on yourself is really good. And also something that it does is it makes it so that your level of rest decreases more slowly. Why this is really important is because you will constantly have to manage your level of rest in the game, or you'll start falling asleep while you're doing activities and you can't see things, which will make you have to go sleep somewhere. The less often you have to do this, the more you can play, so that's a really good thing to have. The primary means of gaining experience from this is from combat, from performing advanced techniques that you can learn from trainers like Master Strikes and things like that. I find I do those a lot, and combos. And from, regular trainings, such as running around the landscape, jumping over things, etc. like that, climbing up on things. So you're just going to gain this naturally throughout the course of the game. If you feel like your vitality is not gaining as fast as you like, you can always read books, but I just find that you kind of just gain this throughout playing the game. You don't really have to put a lot of effort into it in general. One perk that I highly recommend getting as soon as you can is Next to Godliness. What this perk does is it allows you to heal for 10 points whenever you use a wash tub or go into a bathhouse. And it also makes it so that you heal faster while you sleep. So you're going to get back up to full health while sleeping more easily. And I swear, I use this all the time in my playthrough. Washing at a tub is anytime I see when I'm washing, because I get dirty all the time. And it just heals me every time I do this. And, you can take 30 steps in either direction and then go back and use the tub a lot of times, depending on how dirty it is around the place. So you can heal yourself a lot just from this one perk. Next up is speech. The higher your level in speech, the more likely you are to succeed in skill checks, which will obviously help you in your endeavors unless you like combat as much. It'll save you time. It'll give you more rewards a lot of the time. And it also allows you to get good outcomes in some quests that you might otherwise not. And you can also make more money more easily because you can haggle more easily with vendors. So speech is a very, very important skill in this game. And it's arguably the most important stat of the four, since if you're trying to play a good Henry and you want to get good outcomes in quests, you're going to need this a lot. The primary ways you gain experience in this are through talking to people and using skill checks and dialogues, which if you're trying to be a speechy character anyway, you will, and also from reading books, believe it or not. Reading books, you can read books to improve other stats and skills as well, but just reading in general will improve speech no matter which book you're reading because it improves your vocabulary. When it comes to perks, I really like the Jack of all trades perk from speech. This makes it so you get a bonus of +2 to skill checks, and you also get twice the amount of experience from using these skill checks. So this is going to make it just easier to do things with your skills in the game in general, and it's definitely one I recommend any character take. Taking a look at stamina. Stamina is the resource in the game that you do just about everything with. You fight with it, you sprint with it, and what you'll notice about your stamina in this game is that it will lower as your health lowers. If you're drunk, or if you're injured, or if you're tired, you'll have less stamina, and this will make it harder for you to fight in combat and things like that, or even explore if you're sprinting all over the place. So you want to make sure that you have high stamina, and the best way to do that is to make sure that you take care of Henry. Make sure he's well fed, make sure he's well rested, make sure he's not injured, make sure he's not hungover, these sort of things. And improving your vitality stat is definitely going to help make sure that your stamina is better. Health is obviously how much damage you can take before you die, and health doesn't restore itself naturally over time. There are a couple perks you can take that will replenish health over time, which I'll mention a little bit later in this video that you should absolutely get. But you have to take care of yourself and Henry in order to regain your health. This is usually done by sleeping or visiting bathhouses, as the perk I just mentioned before. Using the wash tub, if you have that, will heal you some. Some foods will heal you. Marigold decoction will heal you. Keeping a track of your health is really important. As I mentioned earlier, it affects stamina, which, is pretty much a big factor in winning or losing a lot of battles. So even if you have low health and you're very skilled, if you have very low stamina, it's very difficult to win fights. Additionally, you need to treat bleeding wounds with bandages or you'll keep hemorrhaging health. This is why bandages might be one of the single most important items in the game. You should always loot them off any corpse you have. They weigh almost nothing. Carry as many of them with you as you have. constantly, because anytime you're bleeding, you'll need to take care of that in order to be able to regain your health. Also, some foods can heal you. Keep an eye on what foods do on the side of the screen when you're looking at them in your inventory, and keep an eye out for ones like dried apple in particular heals you for 5 health every time you use it. It's quite regular to loot off enemies, so make sure you know which ones can heal you, and you might be able to eat some of them from time to time as well to heal yourself. Just make sure you don't overeat. Energy is an important factor in this game, and you'll need to rest Henry from time to time in order to make sure he's at top energy. Fighting and things like that will deplete his energy. Running around exploring will deplete his energy, and you'll need to rest to get it back up, or he'll be falling asleep. You won't be able to see things when this happens. He can actually die, I think, if you let his exhaustion go all the way down to the bottom. I've never done that, but I think it's possible. And there are also things, too, that impact like how quickly you recover this. Like, for instance, if you sleep in a really good bed, you'll gain your energy back more quickly than if you sleep on a hard ground. So keep that in mind. And also, you can prevent fatigue by drinking alcohol, like in a pinch, or maybe you just like drinking alcohol in this game. So be aware of that. You also have Nourishment in this game, and that's something you'll have to manage. As it gets lower, it will negatively impact the stats of Henry. Like, it'll make his stats lower, so it'd be less effective in dialogue and combat and things like that. So you need to make sure you're eating regularly. Make sure that when you're eating food that you check like the freshness of it, and if it's spoiled, you will make yourself sick, so don't eat spoiled food. I generally don't eat anything that's like below about 70% freshness. There's plenty of food in this game. You don't have to eat everything you see. And also keep in mind that dried foods last much, much longer in your inventory. So I highly recommend, particularly when defeating enemies, looting the dried foods or eating the perishable foods quickly and hanging on to the dry foods for maybe a scenario where you don't have any. And also be careful not to overeat, because overeating will also give you penalties. So you need to try and keep it eating enough, but not too much. So moving on to the secondary stats, we'll take a look at Charisma first. This one plays a big impact in your skill checks during dialogue. And your Charisma is actually an average of the Charisma values of individual pieces of clothing or armor that are visible. So when you look at a piece of equipment and you see the stats on it for Charisma, it's not actually adding that exact amount of Charisma to your Charisma stat. It's averaging out all your visible pieces and giving you a total Charisma value based on that. So the more pieces that you have that have high Charisma, the better your Charisma stat's going to be. And keep in mind, this isn't counting things that are under other things that can't be seen either. And you want to make sure your Charisma is high at all times in order to be able to get the speech checks passed that you want in dialogue, convince people, get good outcomes. Like, this is very, very important in my playthrough. And a couple of things you've got to keep in mind when doing that is that you need to repair your equipment if it's damaged, so that doesn't lower your Charisma values. If you have blood all over yourself, that's going to lower your Charisma. Or if you're like really dirty, if your clothing is dirty, you're going to also lose Charisma points. So make sure that you're washing your clothing. Sometimes, you can't use like a wash tub to get all the dirt out of your clothing. You'll have to go to a bathhouse, or you'll have to use some soap at a laundry place in order to wash your clothing to get all the dirt out. So make sure you're keeping an eye on your Charisma stat, and if you see it going down, keep an eye on your gear and treat it appropriately so that you can pass those checks when they happen. Next, you have Conspicuousness. This indicates how distinctive your appearance is and how long it takes people to recognize you when they see you. So the main time you'll notice this, in my opinion, is when you're trying to fight enemies at an enemy camp, and maybe you're going in stealthy and they see you, but then they don't act, right? Like, they see you and they're like, huh, what's that? Like, they're not, the higher your Conspicuousness, they're going to look at you and go, oh, it's an enemy, and then attack you. But the lower your Conspicuousness, they're going to be like, huh, what's that? And then they might just stand there for a minute where you can get out of range, and then they don't detect you. So Conspicuousness really plays a role in stealth, predominantly, where I find it most impactful in the game. So having lower Conspicuousness will generally make it easier for you to like stealthily clear a camp or to stealth through an area and not get caught. Visibility is kind of similar but slightly different. Visibility affects how far away an enemy or a person will notice you from. So in the case where you're trying to like stealthily clear out a camp, that distance between you and the person before they go, huh, is going to be longer the less visibility you have. So the higher visibility you have, the more obvious it's going to be that you're, that you can be seen. So if you want to play a stealthy character, you want to have very low visibility so that they can't even see you until they're already dead. So keep that in mind. And again, this is another stat that predominantly takes and affects stealth. And then we have noise. Again, noise is another stat that affects mostly sneaking and stealth. If you're wearing like plate armor, like it's going to be very hard for you to sneak because people can hear you moving around because your armor's clanking around. So if you're trying to play a stealthy character, make sure you're not wearing very heavy armor. If you're not worried about playing a stealthy character and you're not sneaking at all, you're definitely going to want to wear really good armor so that you don't die during combat as easily. Speed is basically how fast you move. It's derived from your agility level predominantly, so the higher agility you have, the faster you're going to move. It also is affected by how heavy of armor you're wearing, so if you're wearing very heavy armor, you might move slower, your stamina cost to move might cost more. But increasing your agility and strength can mitigate and offset some of this. So you'll notice this less and less throughout the game, but if you feel like you're moving very slow early on, consider wearing lighter armor. So then you have 6 dialogue stats. You basically have 3 positive and 3 negative. You have persuasion, impression, and presence, which are impacted by your speech level and a little bit by your charisma, but also your reputation, right? Like if you have a good reputation in a town or a city, then you're more likely to pass your persuasion, impression, and presence checks. And conversely, coercion, domination, intimidation work the opposite. You're more likely to pass these if you have negative reputation in the area or town that you're in. You can see the reputation that you have on the map, like the face on there, whether it's red or gold or whatever color it is, what facial expression it's making, you have a general idea of your reputation. So depending on what sort of Henry you want to play, you're probably going to focus on one of these types, right? If you're going to be focusing on getting high reputation and go persuasion, impression, and presence, or you're not going to worry about reputation, you might have lower and use coercion, domination, or intimidation. Okay, so that wraps up the stats. Moving on to skills. The first one is Alchemy. This is how you make potions in the game. The higher your Alchemy skill, the more mistakes you can make while making potions, and they still come out fairly well. You'll gain experience from making potions, or reading books about alchemy. Those are predominantly the ways that you'll gain experience in alchemy in this game. And the better you are at alchemy, the more potions you can make at once, the higher level potions you can make, etc. There are a couple perks inside alchemy that I highly recommend for anyone. First one is Secret of Equilibrium and Secret of Equilibrium 2. This makes it so that you can make more mistakes before your potion is messed up. Right, like if you make a bad version of a potion, you get a weak version. If you make an okay version, you get a normal version. And if you make a great version, you get strong. So this makes it so it's easier to get those strong potions that have improved effects from your potions. And the next is Secret of Matter and Secret of Matter 2. This makes it so that each time you successfully brew a potion, you're going to gain more potions of the same quality. So it's going to make it so that you can make more potions in the same time, because alchemy takes a lot of time to do. So not only do you want to have caution on the side of error from the previous perk, but now you're going to get more out of it when you do it. So both these are really good to have. So next we move on to Craftsmanship. You'll predominantly see the results of improving Craftsmanship in weapon sharpening and in blacksmithing, the blacksmithing kind of mini game. When you first start sharpening your weapon in this game, it takes forever, but as you gain more and more Craftsmanship, it gets so fast. You'll definitely want to do it yourself later on in the game. You might want to have a blacksmith do it early on unless you are, short of funds. By improving your blacksmithing, you'll be able to craft higher quality equipment. You'll be able to repair higher quality items using, repair kits and things like that. And you'll use fewer of those when you repair your equipment or use the laundry. You predominantly gain experience in blacksmithing from, sharpening your weapon, from crafting things at the blacksmithing station, from using repair kits and washing your clothes. This can seem really tedious at first when you first start doing it, but the higher your craftsmanship skill gets, the faster these things go, the less tedious they get. So keep that in mind, that it's not always going to be as slow or difficult as when you first start out. Additionally, I highly recommend finding books on craftsmanship and reading them, or using skill trainers for this, because it can save you a lot of time. Blacksmithing is a very time-consuming activity, and it can get tedious if you just plan on manually ranking it up by crafting, and you can save yourself some of that tedium by learning from books or from people that can teach you, so that it's just faster from the get-go. There are many, many, many good perks in craftsmanship, and I'll just draw your attention to a couple of them. First is Razor Sharp. This makes it so that when you sharpen your sword to 98% or better, which would basically be every time you sharpen it, it's going to deal an extra 10% damage until it gets below 75% durability, which you'll probably just sharpen again at that point. This is really good for increasing your damage. Thorough Maintenance and Thorough Maintenance 2 make it so your equipment take less damage, which makes it so you don't need to repair them as often, and that's just really good in general. Locksmith is excellent if you plan on lockpicking a lot in this game. I lockpick like every single chest I see, basically, so this is really good to have as it makes it easier to do. And the last one I want to mention is Martin's Secret. If you take this perk, it actually allows you to create weapons that are quality 4. It's the only way to get quality 4 weapons in the game. So if you want to have an even better improved version of a weapon you already have or can make, then you'll definitely want to take this one. Next is the drinking skill. This one should be pretty obvious. It makes it so that it takes you longer to get drunk when drinking alcohol, that it's harder to get a hangover, they'll be milder, they'll get rid of them more quickly when you do have them. And the predominant means of using drinking in this game, in my opinion, for the average player, is that there are just some parts of the game where you're drinking with people in order to, accomplish an objective. And you can really mess it up if you get absolutely hammered. And you can't pass some dialogue checks if your drinking skill is too low. So increasing your drinking skill is going to allow you to pass those dialogue checks more easily. And again, this is another stat where I highly recommend reading books about it and improving your stats on it that way more quickly, unless you want to just spend like an ungodly amount of time just drinking alcohol in this game, which you might want to do. Probably the best all-around perk for drinking is Indomitable Drunk, which makes it so the negative effects of drunkenness will be milder for you, so you can just enjoy the positive effects of it more easily. Nightcap is also pretty good, though. This makes it so that if you're meant to get a hangover after drinking, if you go pass out before this happens, you won't get a hangover, which is great because it's a long negative effect. And it also makes it so beds are more comfortable if you go to bed drunk, which means that you gain rest more quickly, you gain more energy more quickly. So it just improves sleeping in general. Moving on to Horsemanship. This is going to increase your skill when you're riding on a horse. Basically, it's going to make it so your stamina consumption will decrease when you're riding at high speeds, which means you can ride at high speeds longer. Your horse is less skittish when threatened, so it won't buck you as easily. And it's more difficult for enemies to throw you from the saddle. In my experience, you're predominantly just using this to ride long distances without running out of stamina. That's basically what the horsemanship skill is good for. And you really gain experience from it from just riding and traveling distances. You don't gain it from fast traveling, even though you will use fast travel a lot in this game. Keep in mind that that's not going to improve your riding skill. So this is another one that, you can either read books about, or, you'll just gain naturally from riding around on the landscape and exploring, which you'll do a lot naturally anyway. I don't find I do a lot of mounted combat in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. There are very few opportunities for it where it makes sense. The controls are a bit difficult. So I don't think you really need to worry too much about mounted combat. One perk I highly, highly recommend is Head Start and Head Start 2. This makes it so that if you're on your horse and you're standing still and you press left shift, like bang, bang, you'll just take off really, really quickly. And this is a great way to get your horse up to speed fast rather than kind of like building up to speed. And it can get you places much more quickly. And Final Stretch is also a must. This makes it so that when your horse is nearly out of stamina, you can press left shift again. There'll be a prompt, and it'll recover some of your stamina once every 2 minutes, which is basically, you're probably not going to use it more than that anyway, if I'm honest. But this makes it so you can ride longer distances much, much longer before you run out of stamina. Next is the Houndmaster skill. This allows you to control Mutt in combat, and for him to get stronger in combat, be more obedient, help you discover things on the landscape. I'll admit I didn't use him very much in my playthrough. If you plan on bringing him with you, then you will definitely level this up over time. Probably by feeding him, petting him, using his skills in combat, hunting, things like that. Just interacting with him and having him interact with the game in general. As far as perks go, there's some really good ones, but I really like Bark. This allows him to draw attention to himself. So if you're trying to play like a stealthy character and you need to move like someone that's blocking where you need to go, or maybe you want to stealth kill someone and you need to get behind them, but they're backs up against a wall, this can be great for allowing that sort of situation to happen. Next is the Scholarship skill. This is basically like your knowledge of things in general. Well, you'll find this impacts mostly are in dialogues. You can make deductions about things and have better outcomes if you have high scholarship. You'll also be able to consume and read books faster in order to gain the knowledge of them more quickly so that you don't spend as much time doing them with this skill. And you gain experience predominantly through reading books, by applying your scholarship in conversations and learning new interesting things. You can get scholarship increase in skill or a skill experience simply by having dialogues with people and asking about worldly things like their travels and things like that. That's a great way to increase experience. Definitely, this is another one that I recommend potentially reading books to try and improve, or just reading books in general and improve it, because it can really help a lot of conversations go your way. And when it comes to perks, there's a couple here that improve the speed at which you gain experience for skills. Highly recommend that, because the faster you gain experience in skills, the better they're just going to be overall. But there's one called Explorer that I think is arguably the best perk in the game, or could be considered the best perk, which basically reveals all points of interest on the map. This includes all NPCs that have some sort of interactivity in terms of like vendors and things like that. So if you feel like you miss things and you're like 100% completionist, make sure you take Explorer. It's probably the best perk you can get. Next, we move to Stealth. This is obviously for sneaking around, being undetected. It makes it so that, as you improve in Stealth, you make less noise when you're sneaking. It's harder for enemies to see you. You can avoid situations when you're fast traveling more easily. And you gain experience in this by pickpocketing, picking locks, stealthily disposing of enemies, and sneaking near enemies. So if you're playing like a stealthy character, you're generally going to just level this up from playing the way a stealthy character would, and it'll just make it easier and easier to do over time. One thing I would recommend equipping, if you haven't, is equipping a dagger if you're playing a stealth character. This will allow you to go from just being able to knock out enemies to outright killing them, or having a chance to kill them successfully from stealth. So make sure you have a dagger equipped if you're planning on doing that. There are so many good perks within stealth. You'll probably take the vast majority of them by the time you're, through the game, or almost all of them. There are a couple exceptions to that, which is the Rodent versus Weasel Boy. Rodent makes it easier to sneak indoors, while Weasel Boy makes it easier to sneak outdoors. These are mutually exclusive, meaning you can't have both. I find it's harder to sneak indoors for quests. Generally, it's easier to be caught. That's why I took that one. Weasel Boy would be better if you're planning on like stealthily eliminating camps of enemies regularly. I found myself that as I progressed the game and Henry got stronger in general at melee combat, that the stronger and stronger I got, the less stealth I was doing outside on the landscape. And really the only times I was needing stealth was like on particular missions or in particular circumstances where I needed to steal something inside. That's why I went that way. The Ambusher perk is also really good. This applies to both melee and range damage. So whether you're ranging down an enemy that doesn't know you're there, or you're meleeing an enemy, it's good in general, so I highly recommend that one. Next is Survival. This basically makes it easier to hunt game, obtain more meat from them, makes it so gathering herbs is quicker, and it makes it so it's easier to escape when you're fast traveling if you're put in a situation where you might be ambushed, things like that. You gain experience from this, from hunting game, gathering herbs, smoking your food, drying, etc., and from discovering new places on the map. I find I don't care much about the skill. I feel like its primary use in general is just escaping fast travel situations. Typically at the beginning of the game, though, you want to experience these. So this typically comes into play later in the game. But you don't really need to like smoke, cook, and dry a lot of meat in this game. I find that like just simply playing the game, I looted so much food that hunting didn't seem as relevant to me in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 as it did in the first game. So I don't think you're going to really need this skill all that much. However, the skill does have some excellent perks. First one being Wanderer, which makes it so that you get more rest when you're sleeping. So this is just really good in general. Heartseeker is really good, increasing the damage that you do when you hit enemies in the chest, and Heartseeker 2 as well. So, and this applies to the back as well. So like if you're trying to stealth kill enemies and you shoot them in the chest, you're going to do more damage. Or if you're just aiming for center mass, a lot of times you're going to do more damage. Master Fletcher is also really good if you're playing like a ranged character and you're focusing on like using crossbows and bows or firearms or something like that. It's very good to have. And Leshy, I find, is also really good. Getting the stat increases while you're like out on the landscape is like constant pretty much. So that and Leshy 2 are both really, really good. Recommend both of those. And then lastly, we come to Thievery. This makes it so lockpicking and pickpocketing is easier. As your level increases, you'll be able to tackle stronger locks. What they've done in this game compared to the first game is they've made it so that you can't attempt very hard or difficulty locks early on to prevent people from getting frustrated. So you'll have to increase your Thievery in order to do like the hard and very hard lockpicking. So keep that in mind. And you're primarily going to gain experience from this from lockpicking and pickpocketing. Shocking. The stronger lock you overcome and the more valuable items you steal, the more experience you gain. This is going to be something you use all throughout the game. It's definitely a little bit easier, in my opinion, than the first game, and you will notice that it's easier and easier to do the higher your Thievery skill is. So when you first start lockpicking at the beginning of the game, it's going to be quite frustrating, but it should get easier fast. And, by the time you're at like 10 Thievery, 15 Thievery, you should be able to do like medium locks, like no problem. A couple perks I really like here are Toolmaster. This makes it so your lockpicks are more durable and they last longer before breaking. So this just makes lockpicking in general a little bit easier because, again, at the beginning you're going to struggle a bit and you don't want your lockpicks to break. And then Stamping Ground is also really good. This makes it so that your stealth is higher by 3 in settlements or their immediate vicinity. Again, like stealthing around people where lots of people are is like the hardest there is to do. So you want your stealth to be higher in those scenarios. So moving on to combat skills, first is Warfare. This basically makes it so that your attacks are faster. The harder it will be for opponents to read them and parry your attacks, which happens sometimes in combat quite frequently. And your weapons also take less damage during combat. And the way this increases is from just using your weapons in combat, improving your weapon skills in unarmed combat. So it's going to improve naturally as you're fighting in combat with different weapons and things like that. And you're really going to notice a difference as this goes up in the game because you get parried a lot, you get blocked a lot in combat, and as you get further and further into the game, that starts happening less and less often. And the game kind of turns into left-click simulator at some point because enemies just can't deal with your attacks very well as this gets really, really high, closer to 30. So you will notice this very easily. When it comes to perks, I like the Against All Odds perk. This increases your strength, agility, and warfare skills when you're outnumbered. You're outnumbered more than you're not outnumbered in combat in this game, so you're going to get that benefit like very, very frequently. Unbreakable is also really good. If you're outnumbered in a fight, your stamina will recover 20% faster. Again, you're outnumbered all the time, and getting that stamina back is going to allow you to fend off the attackers more easily. One-man army, same concept. When you're outnumbered, you deal 10% more damage. You're outnumbered more often than you're not, so it's good to have a damage increase in this case. So moving on to the actual different weapons themselves, first is swords. The higher your swordsmanship skill, the faster your attacks are going to be, the more damage they'll do, the harder it will be for your opponents to block them. And obviously, the best way to gain experience with swords is using swords in combat. You're going to use swords or long swords. Any sword weapon, short swords, hunting swords, sabers, all of these will improve your sword skill. One particularly great thing about swords is they tend to set bleeding on enemies. You'll notice this when you get hit yourself, which can help kill enemies more quickly. But you will find, particularly early on in the game, that when you're fighting heavily armored opponents, swords are not as good of a weapon since they can't really punch through that armor very easily. And as you get later and later into the game, this matters less and less. But in the first half of the game, it's probably better to have a secondary weapon set with something that can deal with heavy armor. Probably the claim to fame of swords is Master Strike, which allows you to attack simultaneously when you see the green shield if you are on the opposite direction, if your weapon is in the opposite direction of the person attacking you. So if they're holding it to their right, you're holding it to your right, when they attack and you click attack, you're going to do like an unblockable hit against them. A lot of combat in this game is won that way. This is something that's unique to swords, and is probably a very big reason to use swords. One really good perk for this as well is Swordmaker's Wisdom. This makes it so your craftsmanship level will count as 3 levels higher during blacksmithing, making that easier. As I said, this can be kind of a tedious activity, so making that higher is good. And it also makes it so all sword-like weapons get 25% less damage in combat, meaning they're going to stay sharper longer. And if you combine that with the Razor Sharp perk we were talking about earlier, that's going to make sure that extra 10% damage stays on your weapon longer. And Opening Strike is absolutely fantastic, and you'll find this out like later on in the game. If you successfully wound an opponent by striking an uncovered zone, it makes it difficult for them to block your subsequent attacks. Again, as I mentioned, eventually the game just turns into left-click spam. This is one of the reasons for that if you're using like a long sword or something, because you hit them with that first hit, and then it's just easier to hit them afterward, and they just eventually go down. Next, we move to heavy weapons. Heavy weapons include clubs, maces, axe, and warhammers. The higher skill you have with heavy weapons, the faster your attacks will be, inflicting more damage, making it harder for your opponents to defend against them. These weapon types are usually best against heavily armored opponents. Especially if or if you want to use a shield, they're great with using a shield as well. So it's definitely not bad to have these like in a backup slot, particularly in the first half of the game when you're fighting very heavily enemies and your sword just isn't cutting it. And obviously the way you gain experience with these is by using them in combat, using maces, axes, warhammers, clubs, etc. So if you want to gain experience in heavy weapons, the easiest way is to just equip them and start using them in combat, or you can read books on it as well, or go to skill trainers. There are a lot of good perks in heavy weapons. It kind of depends on what sort of weapon you're using. There's some specific to like axes, some specific to like maces. So you might take those depending on which weapon type you like. The benefit of maces is they do more blunt damage, so they're better against very heavily armored opponents, where axes do some blunt damage, but not as much, but they can also cause bleeding, which is good. I do like Sundering Blow and Sundering Blow 2, though. This makes it when you hit an enemy with a heavy weapon, their armor count is lowered. This makes it so they're less armored if you bash them, making it easier to, deal damage to them. Then we come to polearms. Polearms include weapons like spears, halberds, and glaives, or poleaxes, or even two-handed knight hammers and axes. These are like the longest weapon in the game, so if you like long reach, it's really good. And it can be good against enemies when you're outnumbered, because you can hit an enemy from a long distance while you kind of stay out of reach from other enemies. One of the biggest issues when you're outnumbered in this game is trying to attack an enemy without getting hit by other enemies, like either from the side or the back, and this can make that more easy. Militia training is a great perk for this, reducing the strength and agility required for using pole weapons. That's just good to have because, it'll allow you to use stronger polearms earlier on in the game. Impaler is also really good. This just improves your damage by 10% and increases even more when you take Impaler 2. You do piercing damage predominantly with polearms, and this is just going to increase that damage, making them more effective. Next, we come to Unarmed. This is where you're fighting, with bare fists. You'll do this a lot in the game, whether it's in quests or just, from fighting in tournaments and things like that. A great way to gain experience with like strength and agility too. So I tend to do this a lot just to help level up a lot of stats simultaneously. The higher your skill, the more powerful and faster your attacks will be, and the harder it'll be for enemies to defend against them. And you gain experience from this from fighting unarmed, obviously. I really like the no pain, no gain perk here. This increases the amount of experience in strength, agility, and vitality you gain when fighting unarmed. This allows you to really take advantage of like the combat arenas that are unarmed and, like I said earlier, gaining more experience in everything simultaneously, making it really more rewarding to take on unarmed fights because they can get a bit tedious, but this is a great way to gain stats. I also really like Sting Like a Bee. This makes it so the first 30 seconds of combat in which you're unarmed, your attacks will be 30% stronger and your stamina will recover 30% faster. Most of the time when you're unarmed, most of the time you're fighting one-on-one, and I tend to play very aggressively. This lets you play aggressively more because you can just knock an opponent out really, really quickly. You don't spend a lot of time fighting. Sandman is also really good, makes it easier to knock out opponents or stealth kill people from stealth when you're, in stealth. And if you like to play stealthily, you'll definitely want to take this one. I think just about everyone can take advantage of this, even if you don't always play stealthily. So definitely get this. Last up is Marksmanship. This is using ranged weapons like bows, crossbows, and handguns in the game, or, ranged guns. The higher skill you have makes it easier to aim and makes it easier to hit things with your ranged weapons, which can be very difficult when you're first starting out. And you gain experience by, using these weapons in combat, whether you're hunting, target competitions, also improve this. And Marksmanship is definitely one that's kind of difficult to increase organically, like if you're trying to do it through combat, because usually what happens is you'll start out like at an enemy camp and you'll hit the first guy or the second guy, and by then the enemies are in melee range and you have to switch to melee, and you get far more melee experience because there's like 6 guys you're meleeing after you killed 2 with a range. So I definitely highly recommend participating in shooting competitions. It's a great way to gain experience. Also reading books on archery or getting skill training from other NPCs that can train you is a great way to kind of like jumpstart your marksmanship to get it to a point where it's more easier to do naturally and you'll find yourself using it more. When it comes to marksmanship perks, I really like Salvo. This makes it so after each shot you get a short-term buff that makes it so that you reload and aim faster. If you want to fire off multiple arrows quickly, this makes shooting competitions go faster, but it also makes it more likely you'll be able to use your bow or crossbow more quickly to take out enemies in a combat, right? Like, you can't just kill 6 dudes with 1 crossbow shot, so you're going to have to reload and fire again, and shortening that time till you can fire makes it possible to play, a ranged character more easily. One-shot glory, also great. Your next shot after killing the enemy will deal 50% more damage. So if you shoot one guy and then you shoot the next, you might be able to kill them both in 2 shots, which is great. So that's kind of the progression of Henry in Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. I hope you guys gave you some helpful info based on my experience. I played about 100 and some hours of this game, and these are the things that I've kind of learned in my time playing this. Keep in mind that, you can level up everything in this game if you have enough time, and you can just go grind it out if you want. So you don't have to specialize in one type of combat or one type of skill or another. You can level them all up. I'm just trying to give you some recommendations on things to do to speed that up so that you can, play that you want to play. For instance, like if you're using swords all the time, which is what I did in my playthrough, you might want to read books about heavy weapons and polearms or go to skill trainers to level them up. That way, if you get in a scenario where you only have a polearm or you only have a heavy weapon, which there are some scenarios in the game, you're not completely ineffective with those weapons. So that wraps up our video. I hope it gave you guys some helpful tips and helpful information for those of you that are, looking for some info before you start playing. The game tends to throw out a lot of things at you really quickly, so it's hard to understand all this at the very beginning. As always, if you have other tips that I forgot to mention, or if you have other questions, please leave them in the comments and I will try and answer them as soon as I can.